Hey guys, so as human beings, we are built to compensate. And that's a fantastic thing. We're able to live in the hot, we're able to live in the cold, and we're able to live on Budweiser and Cheez-Its. And I'm sure there's a bunch of you that maybe know someone that's doing just that right now. Now, this ability to compensate is extremely helpful for us to keep going, for us to achieve a goal, for us to be able to adapt and be able to work under difficult situations or when things are not as ideal as we would otherwise like them to be. It's very useful. But compensation can become a problem when we're not able to then return back to perhaps the more effective way for us to do things over a long period of time. So compensation is something that is awesome in the short term, but could become problematic in the long term. And when it comes to the human body and its ability to move and function and do things physically, compensation is great, but it can become a problem and lead to a lot of weird, chronic, and reoccurring aches and pains. And what I'm going to share with you are some common compensatory patterns that, again, are perfectly fine until you make that face so much that it sticks, and then that's all you can do. You don't even know you're doing it, and it just goes on, and it doesn't feel great. All right, again, so these are some generalities for common compensatory patterns, but oftentimes when we look at an individual that's having to compensate and kind of muscle through their days, make it happen, what we will see is there's a couple of layers often present. And oftentimes there is a top layer of tightness to these compensatory patterns, and that circles around the way in which a person breathes and respires. And oftentimes with this top layer there is breath holding. Now, if we were to take any human being and stress, strain them, push them to their limit with just about any endeavor, any neurologic, respiratory, system-wide strain, we're going to see breath holding come out. And what that does is very useful is it creates a certain level of rigidity that allows for either leverage with the movement or precision, being absolutely still when you need it or want it, or perhaps hiding, not being seen, not being heard. It's something that is very useful, but only in the instances that you need to use it. And for a lot of folks, they get stuck holding their breath subtly, and they tend to just breathe in and out around this subtle breath hold. And what this is some folks will tend to get stuck holding their breath on a inhale, and it biases them to a certain sort of shape. Other folks will get stuck holding their breath around a exhale, and they breathe in and out around that shape. The person that is stuck more on an inhale, they've got a lot of power lifting things up, they got a lot of power overhead, they can get that thing for you, but could you get that thing for me? They'll have a hard time compressing. They'll have a hard time getting underneath things. They'll have a hard time squatting and crouching on down, getting into those positions. So in that situation, that person needs to learn to exhale a bit more and not be so biased to that inhale if they're stuck there and it's causing a problem. On the other hand, we've got folks that are stuck more on an exhale. They're going to look a little smaller at some points, their torso, but they can live right here. They will get that thing for you. They'll sneak under the load. They'll sneak well. They'll get under the bar, under the weight, but could you get that for me? Those sort of things kind of show up. So in that case, this individual has got to be able to open on up, reach, open on up, take a big breath in, and oftentimes it's into some very particular places. Now that's the top layer of tightness, the breath holding. Underneath it, we've got some very unique things to our species, and there is asymmetry that is there that is awesome until it becomes so biased and so significant that we get problems, and that's the next layer that we'll go into. All right, so below that top layer of tightness, that breath holding, we've got some asymmetry going on for us as a species. Now, on the outside, we look fairly symmetrical. But if we were to open this torso up, it would be obvious that we're really not. You've got a heart over here on the left. You got your liver over on the right. Because your heart is over on the left, this lung on the left is smaller. It's got 2 lobes. The lung on the right, it's bigger, noticeably bigger. It's got 3 lobes. This liver is a pretty big organ, and on the other side, we got a stomach that is empty, hopefully, more than half the time. And because of that, we've got 2 heavy organs that create a meat stack that makes it easier for a human being to drift and center over their right leg. In addition, you've got a diaphragm, and you actually have 2 diaphragms. You got a right and a left diaphragm. Your right diaphragm is bigger, measurably bigger than your left, and that will pull you over with that meat stack over that right leg, and this is awesome because as a species, it allows us to stand up and have a reliable side to torque into, and as long as we can move these arms back and forth, then we have the ability to walk and run upright. We've got torque, and we can huff and puff and still look around. It pumps air in and out of us, but only if, as we get over to that right side, we can get off of it and over to that opposite side, the left. And this is what happens to a lot of folks is, well, this body is biased not towards being still. It is not biased to be a pillar. We are not built to be a building. We're not built to be a statue. We are built to move around. So when we are static, when we are parked for a period of time, we will drift every human being to the right. It is built in us. It is biased in us. It is awesome. The problems only come up when we don't live the way that a human being evolved to live, which is walking, moving about, crawling, climbing, doing all sorts of things throughout our day. We evolved to move. And when we park, we drift. And what can happen to a lot of folks is they get very biased and buried in their right side. They will be much more torqued into their right side, into their right hip. And over time, it can, if they get kind of parked there, it can get hard getting off of that right side and over their left. And for this individual, it may be much easier for them to stand on their right leg than their left. And that would be a very typical problem that we would see, and part of the solution is learning to get on off of that right and over to that left side. Often things have to be opened up. Now, when someone gets really parked on that right side, buried, then over time they start to crush their bigger lung, their big right lung. And not only do they crush that bigger right lung, but it gets so tipped to the right side that they're living on the outside of their right foot. And this is unsteady. And the brain doesn't want you to die. It wants you to survive in the next moment. So what happens? Well, your right shoulder comes to the rescue, and it becomes a diaphragm, and it helps to pull you off the edge of your right leg. And this individual then has an easier time standing on their left leg now. But if they go onto that right leg, which once was the favorable one, well, you know, they're so over on the outside, it's not steady. They got to go over to that left leg. I'm sure you may know someone that looks like this. Now, that tendency to get buried on the right and then your right shoulder comes to the rescue, that is in all of us. And the running joke would be, you're going to get this if you don't die first. It's kind of coming if you stay above ground long enough and you hold space more, you take more static roles, you're focused on things in this first world, you're going to drift on over to that side. You can manage it by staying moving, but oftentimes that's not what happens, especially these days. And what we're going to see in folks as they kind of sort of carry on in their lifetime is that they are trying to sort of work around being buried in their right side that right shoulder coming to a rescue, and you got about 3 different flavors of people handling this. Sometimes you'll see this hunchback, but oftentimes they will succumb. Both lefty will come to, and they will succumb to the weight of that right shoulder. And this is a person that gets very kyphotic and hunched over. Other times the person tries to straighten up. They pull it together. They hold themselves up. They are working hard. But underneath it, they're just trying to pull it together. Very, very tight, holding themselves up. Knots between their shoulder blades. And then the third one is, well, they're buried over there, righty comes back, and they just sort of like, whoop, they just drip underneath. They're like, no, I'm fine. So instead of them being like here, they just go right underneath, and this is a very slippery individual. Everything's fine. So this is what's going on in the vast majority of us with these postural issues, these shapes that seem to come over time. They seem like something that's watered downhill, it's just going to happen. To an extent, yes, because gravity is always pressing down, but keep in mind that we were built to thrive in this lifetime. We were built to thrive in this environment, working with gravity, working with pressure. It's just that we need to move back and forth, alternate side to side through both sides, using both arms, not just your dominant right arm, in order to not let this situation get out of hand, as it often does for folks. So I hope that was helpful. If you want any more details about these patterns, some of the best resources that I know to go to would be the Postural Restoration Institute. They're the ones that have done a lot of work pulling together a lot of this information and educating both the general public as well as very heavily professionals about how to recognize these patterns and to address them. Regardless, I hope this was helpful. I hope it was informative. Reach out if you got any questions, and I hope you're well.